Laura Tingle, welcome back.
Oh, it's nice to be back, Philip.
Much to talk about. Look, as you know, I contact Gough via Ouija board on a pretty regular basis. He's quite astonished by the budget. Are you?
I think he's probably jealous. Look, I'm not astonished in this sense that the really huge expansion in spending obviously happened last year, and it sort of ended up sort of creating its own sort of momentum because it kick-started the economy and lots of revenue flowed back into the government's coffers. So they did have a choice, of course, though, that they could have cut back on spending and sort of tried to rectify the budgetary ship. But I don't think there was ever any question of doing that, just given the still really precarious nature of the economy and the brutal politics of getting close to the end of the election cycle.
Okay, now, as you know, I'm getting on a bit. I'm well into my octogenarian era, and that makes me not only the ABC's oldest broadcaster, but one of the oldest journalistic hacks in the country. So I take aged care very, very seriously. One of the biggest ticket items was aged care.
It was the biggest ticket item, well, unless you count things that they announced beforehand, which was the sort of $50 a week increase in the unemployment rate, in the unemployment payment. But look, it was a really comprehensive start to addressing decades of sort of sneaky cutbacks and lack of attention to detail and everything going right back, and the fact that the aged population is growing exponentially. So there's this huge increase in the number of home care packages, which really now are the centrepiece of the way we seek to look after old people, that they can stay in their homes for as long as possible. And there were some incentives to make that system work better, some incentives to make the residential aged care system work better. But I think it says a lot, Philip, that the $10 a day per bed subsidy that the federal government's going to chuck on top of the existing payment for residential aged care beds, the test of whether nursing homes are using that well will be what the quality of the food is like.
But look, hang on, the Royal Commission recommended $10 billion per year, and I think the budget allocated $18 billion, but over 5 years.
Yeah, it did. There are a couple of things there. One of them is the Health Minister, who's got overarching responsibility for this, says that the $40 billion was never actually mentioned by the Royal Commission, that this was a figure that other people guesstimated. Now, whether that's right or not, what you have to take into account with the $18 billion is that it's basically impossible to say, okay, the aged care system really sucks, we're going to immediately fix it, because one of the biggest factors, or the biggest factor in making it work better, is in a workforce that's better trained and better paid. And first of all, you've got to find that workforce and train it. So the numbers of extra places in the system build up gradually. So therefore, the eventual levels of spending that are estimated won't be reached in the first couple of years. So there's some explanation there for why the figure isn't as big as the $40 billion that others have estimated it to be.
Now, it's impossible to disconnect the budget from the scheduled reopening of the country. No plans announced for that reopening, as I understand. No, quote, no roadmap out of the gilded cage.
It's really mystifying, Philip. There are some things, sometimes the Prime Minister does things which you sort of just go, well, or the government does things where you go, why? This doesn't even seem to be in your political self-interest. But this became almost immediately the question about the budget. The fact, not that it was saying, well, on the 1st of June we can all go to Disneyland or something. It was just, but people are becoming much more focused on the fact that opening up the economy again is quite a complicated issue. It's not just a question of letting it all rip. It is a question of setting up procedures and protocols for people once they're vaccinated. It's working out what the risk factors are of letting people into the country. It's addressing particular industries that have got skill shortages. It's about letting international students in. It's about how do you assess what other countries' capacities are, and what requirements you're going to put on people before they travel. And there was just nothing about that in the budget other than this general statement that we thought we'd get most people vaccinated by the end of the year, and that the borders would open by about the middle of next year. Now, there was a lot of argy-bargy about that vaccination forecast because, of course, the vaccination program hasn't gone well, but it's sort of a bit irrelevant in a way because at least a quarter of the population, i.e. kids, won't be vaccinated anyway, even if everybody else actually lines up for it. So, we won't be, there'll only be 75% of the community would be vaccinated by the end of the year if everybody did get vaccinated. So there are a lot of really different issues to work through. And Scott Morrison today was starting to talk about that a bit more and saying, well, look, it is complicated and we've got all these things to think about. And our first aim is to get as many people vaccinated as possible and to then allow them to travel within Australia to areas where there might be a lockdown if they've got vaccination, brackets, just so we can get used to this idea, I guess.
We're having a mingle with Tingle, the aura of Laura. Does all this play into his decision about the election date?
Oh, I think it does completely, and I think it's sort of very political as well because you'll remember how the states got a bucketing from Canberra last year when they respectively locked down, and there was a lot of frustration on the part of the Prime Minister at the states locking down because he thought it was holding up the economy and the recovery. So he's decided to sort of do the same thing. So he thinks that at the moment, the lockdown, the closed borders work for him politically. The budget works for him politically because we're at sort of peak money flowing into the economy. That's going to start fading next year, and he's got to make a decision now about whether he goes at some time between roughly August this year and March next year to make sure that he's at minimum risk and maximum benefit from the budget of all the various spending measures.
Probably the worst political decision of late has been the ban on flights from India, but they have resumed. But many passengers have been refused entry because of a positive COVID test. But you raise the point that the reliability of the testing system is in question.
Well, that's right. Some of the people who were knocked off that first flight, turns out they subsequently got negative test results. So there's quite a lot of argy-bargy going on today between Qantas and the government about which testing labs they were using because one of the testing labs apparently had lost its accreditation from one of the Indian authorities last month. So this sort of shows you in microcosm the sorts of complications you can get, that you've got to be absolutely confident of the standards that you're applying if you're going to apply such standards. And you've also got to work out what you're going to do in circumstances like the ones we saw over the weekend, where apparently the people who had thought they were flying out had come to, into, I think it was Delhi. I'm having a senior moment, I can't remember, but I think it was Delhi. And they got to Delhi and then they were told, sorry, you're showing up as positive, you can't get on the plane. But they didn't really have anywhere to go. So I think it puts all sorts of new onus on our embassies and high commissions around the world to work out what they're going to do to help people in these sorts of complicated circumstances. And it's fine to say, well, we're not responsible in that sense. I think in reality they are. And it was interesting that there was actually a bit more money in the budget for consular services, which recognised the problems that have been created by COVID.
I was going to make the obvious point, or echo the point, that the rollout is still having a few teething problems, although ill-fitting dentures might be a better metaphor, but it's pretty dreadful that the disability sector's still, not being covered.
Well, the disability sector is a disgrace. I mean, a lot of the other sections of the community are starting to roll out at a sort of a much more serious clip, just because the states once again have got involved and have got these mass vaccination centres. So that's putting the numbers up. But we saw these really disgraceful numbers revealed today, which basically showed about slightly less than 1,000 of a population of about 26,000 people in disabled group homes and the like had been vaccinated. And they were in one of the first priority groups that should have been done before everybody else was done. And it's still not at all clear to me why this is the case. There doesn't seem to be any really clear explanation of that.
Before I let you go, I was trying to get through to Gough on the Ouija board just before the program to see what he thought of Albo's response. Didn't make contact. How did Albo go?
Well, it was a speech. I suppose you could say it was a speech for the true believers, Philip. It appealed to a lot of...
What, to both of us?
It appealed to a lot of traditional sort of Labor things. I mean, Albo told his log cabin story again. There was stuff in there about social housing. There was some good stuff about apprenticeships in renewable energy and those sorts of new energy sources. But he said in the speech himself, look, this is a once-in-a-century opportunity that's created by this pandemic to transform the economy. But he didn't really have a lot more to say about it than that. Now, Labor people will say to you, there's not much point doing it because nobody's paying any attention. And in fact, the news poll that was out today, apart from showing that it made not one skerrick of real difference to the government or opposition standing, the budget didn't make much of a difference. The number of people who didn't know whether the budget would make them better or worse off was also incredibly high, which suggests people aren't paying attention. So there may be merit in the Albanese case that there's no point, using up all your best ammunition now, and you might as well wait for the election campaign. But I thought, given all of our conversation last week about the fact that the budget was an election budget, you'd be expecting something a bit more in kind back from the opposition leader, and it really wasn't there.
Laura, how's your Stonehenge replica going? I know you've been working on one as well.
That immediately made me think of my all-time favourite movie, Philip. This is Spinal Tap. So I'm going to have to. I've got a few little bits of sandstone, and I think I'm now going to do my own Stonehenge, but I'll have to have a listen.
Well,
to
you'll have to listen.
Henge?
You'll have to listen to Nancy Wisser because
I will.
She knows all about all the Stonehenges, including the one that I'm building in the front garden. Laura Tingle, Chief Political Correspondent for 7:30.